Welcome, everyone, to What the Force, and welcome to an episode all about the reasons why you should check out Dooku Jedi Lost. And this is really an interesting, venture for Star Wars. It's an audio-only book. And this is, I think, their way of approaching the medium of audio dramas, which is not new for Star Wars. Like back once upon a time, when Star Wars was originally out, radio dramas would actually happen of the original saga. So it would be like a new version of the saga that you could actually hear over the radio. But since, say, modern canonical times, or since, Disney's acquisition especially, there has not been an audio drama that has happened for Star Wars. Recently, Marvel itself has started to release their own audio dramas, one specifically about Wolverine. And it's kind of I would say, a venture that they are exploring to see, is there appetite for these, audio only versions of things. The closest parallel that I can use to existing materials out there is probably the audio versions of Ian Dorscher's William Shakespeare's Star Wars, because, it very much has some sound effects and a full cast, and they act out all the parts, etc. But audio dramas have a uniqueness about them. They tell a story with a very unique lens, and sometimes have to use a couple of audio tricks because they're telling things from a narration perspective sometimes, and sometimes you can hear all of the things that are happening within the scene without any narration happening at all. This audio drama, I know it's called an audio only book, but this particular audio drama is incredibly successful. It's very well done. So it was written actually fully as a script by Cavan Scott. He talked about it at Celebration, and I was very happy to be able to actually see him and kind of hear a little bit about what he was doing. And it was produced by Nick Martorelli, who we know from such audio productions like Master and Apprentice and Queen's Shadow, which were both very well done. It's a full and lush audio drama. They do some very interesting things with the audio design. I personally love audio dramas a lot, and so much that I actually created a fandom-based one called Fangirls. It's just coming out now, but I love the art form so much and what you do with it, and how it actually causes you to have to be a little bit creative with the storytelling because of the limitations of only being able to actually hear and produce, imagination pictures because of the audio. But audio dramas most closely relate to ancient storytelling. And that's what I find so fascinating. It's like, people playing characters and telling stories around a fire is very much like how myths were told to us. So it's got this like mythological feel to it as you experience the story, and very much like, how Star Wars is a mythopoeia. It ties to that very, very well. That's really the first reason that you should check it out. It's incredibly well done. As far as like an introduction to an audio drama, I would say it's one of the better I've heard. So good on them. Even as one producing my own and creating my own, I'm very proud that this was their first audio drama attempts. So a good job, everyone involved in the cast and crew and putting this together. The story itself is incredibly compelling. I'm going to go into a spoilers section in a little bit, but these are just kind of the general reasons you should be checking this out. But the story itself is a frame story, so it's told from the perspective of Ventress, Asajj Ventress, the new apprentice assassin of our Sith Lord Dooku. So it's that period of time in the storytelling, probably just before the Clone Wars are about to take place. It looks back through Dooku's journals and hollows telling stories about his past. And it goes from the time that he is around 11, 10, somewhere in there, all the way until he leaves the Jedi Order. So we grow up with Dooku from the time that he is a little kid all the way up. So that is done in an exceptional way. And the story itself, the complications of the galaxy far, far away at the time are really interesting, and how we are able to identify with both Ventress and Dooku is awesome. The world building as well is amazing. There is so much said in this audio drama that I know, had it been a book, there would be massive blog posts with screenshots of pages referencing different aspects of what is being said about parts of the universe at this time, because it's talking directly about an area of canon that we have like no canon knowledge of officially yet. This is as far back as we've gone from a canon perspective, being probably 30 years to 40 years to or so, maybe 50 years. I actually don't know how old Dooku is, so I don't really know. I need somebody like Star Wars Explained to like give me a video on like where this lies in canon for Dooku's experiences when it starts. But it's going back so far that we've never gone this far back. So just like Master and Apprentice, that happens before the time of the Phantom Menace. It's really exciting to hear about these things that, you know, peek into the past, and it also refers to times much further back in time. There's several references to things that are very interesting, just like Master and Apprentice. And from a build interlock into the world, you know, yesterday I just had an episode where I talked about Master and Apprentice and Queen's Shadow, and how I suspected that this book would be interlocked with them. And I was right. Master and Apprentice, very much, these are like brothers. Or Master Dooku and Apprentice Qui-Gon. And then Queen's Shadow very much takes that and takes the universe. And I'm almost interested to read them now from Dooku, Master and Apprentice, and Queen's Shadow, and see kind of how things lay out when you read them in that order. This book makes me want to watch Attack of the Clones over and over and see all of the Dooku scenes. It makes me even more of a stan for Asajj Ventress, and I am absolutely in love with the character of Dooku. If that was Cavan Scott's goal, was to pass on his, I've reported, obsession with Dooku, congratulations, you have a Dooku fan. You have made me a Dooku fan. He is so interesting. There's fascinating Force concepts that I don't know that I have ever heard before. Maybe they existed in Legends. I didn't really pay that close attention to kind of the auxiliary materials before, but there's a lot in there. And I'm going to go into that in a spoiler section, just of the key things that I took away from a meta perspective to make sure that, you know, people kind of hear about them and like maybe pique their interest. But I really do suggest that you check that out before you listen to my spoilers part of this. There is a lot of understanding of the Force within this. Yeah, it's really good. The overall feel of this story is like a puzzle piece that we couldn't figure out where it fit, you know? And then suddenly we got it, and we saw it, and we fit it into the puzzle, and it looks perfect. It fits in. It feels like part of the Star Wars universe, and it's like an aspect of the whole story that we've never even kind of considered. And I think that part of the medium of audio drama, and it is different than audiobook. Like I really, there's something about how they do audio dramas that make it more visceral and more enhanced. I guess I'm at a loss for words because it was so well done. But everyone should check it out. It is exceptional. I'm going to be going into a few of the meta things that I spotted in this audio drama and just kind of talk through, I guess in a way, kind of just get this out of my brain because I have been unable to stop thinking about it since I listened to it. And the highest compliment I can give, if you have listened to the podcast for a really long time, is how much I appreciate Ken Liu's Legends of Luke Skywalker. This book, this audio drama, this audio-only book is now up there with it. I appreciated the storytelling, the meta parallels to the rest of the universe and storytelling, the conceptual things that were introduced, the world building, the characterization. It's character heavy, and there's tons of amazing interactions and moments and discord that the characters have to work through. And I'm seriously considering listening to it again right away. I want to thank Penguin Random House Audio for giving me the opportunity to listen to this before it was out. I think that it's kind of an honor to be able to listen to these things and be able to kind of report on them or talk about them as soon as they are out. So thank you for that honor. I very much look forward to your next venture into the audio drama world and anything by Cavan Scott. I'm going to look you up and figure out how I can consume all of your stories because this was glorious. All right, everybody. We're going to be moving into spoiler territories. So if you are uninterested in hearing anything to do with the book that, past the generic synopsis that, you can read out there or any of the clips that happened very, very early on, turn back now and come back in a little bit. And maybe you noticed these things too. All right. You're staying with me? Okay. So from a spoiler perspective, there is a lot of saga specific parallels. And, that's very much the Star Wars It Rhymes and the concept, the idea of, it's like in Star Wars, it's like samsara, like the Hinduism concept of rebirth and reincarnation. But instead of with a soul that is reincarnated, it's like the story is reused or retold from a different perspective. And specifically, there is a parallel drawn in the story itself between Dooku and Anakin. And it is told between Dooku has a sister that he finds out a little bit about his heritage at one point with this story that's told through Ventress. And the sister and him communicate, and that's how we get the hollows that are telling the story to Ventress as she's going through them all. The story, there was one particular line that was said. Dooku said to himself, basically, our communication across the stars. You don't use that term. You don't use across the stars unless you're specifically trying to draw a parallel to Anakin and Padme and how their attachment was not, it wasn't just Padme and Anakin that had attachments that were part of the Jedi, the Jedi Order and the overall restrictive nature of the Jedi affected. And there's actually several examples of attachments inside of Dooku Jedi Lost. And it just, to me, it just says like, okay, it's like the Star Wars story is trying to, in a way, or the universe is, if we imagine that, the universe is the Force and all of that, the Force is trying to work through the concept of attachment until it can make it work. Like, maybe it's wrong to separate kids from their parents at such a young age. Maybe it's wrong to, do those things. It's a really interesting idea. And the fact that, there's almost a nod, a wink, and a a very obvious cue that this is a parallel to Anakin is really, really interesting, and Anakin's fall. And there's another parallel in general. So the idea of dark force users. And I've explored this concept before, and I plan to explore it again. But how dark force users act and how they behave and what it means for them, we see inside of Ventress's head specifically. And she's having kind of an experience where she's able to have a conversation. So I won't spoil that aspect of it. But if you've listened to the book already or the audio drama already, you know exactly what's happening. But she's having a conversation, and I'm going to just kind of quote it here. She's asked, "How did you become this way?" And she answers, "What? A monster?" And then she muses to herself a few moments later, "How did I become this creature?" And then we get this very poignant Ventress, please, from the other person. And anyone who's like obsessed with The Last Jedi, like I am, notices the parallels to Kylo in that. Am I a creature in a mask? You are a monster. Yes, I am. Really, really fascinating that they're pulling back the comparison of Ventress to Kylo. Ventress, of course, does get redeemed. She murders somebody in this book, and she has qualms, but those qualms are disappearing kind of in it. So there's that parallel. And most importantly, because of being able to see Dooku basically grow up from a young man, a young man who is innocent and a good person and cares, and yet still falls to the dark side, still falls to the dark side. It's just really fascinating that we can identify so much with Dooku after, listening to his story, and still have him, become the Sith Lord we know in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Here's a little bit of speculation. Kevin Scott has tweeted multiple times, "Thank you, Slimo, for finding these tweets." I messaged her just like, has Kevin Scott ever said these things? And he actually had tweeted multiple times about how interested he would love to write the story of young Ben Solo. First person perspective, I'm sure. The story of, Kylo Ren before he becomes Kylo Ren. And then we get a story of Dooku before he is Count Dooku or Darth Tyrannus. Really, really interesting that he is so interested in the, I would say, psychology of people that fall to the dark side. So I'm sure you guys will all be musing on that one for a little while. Other things that are very, very interesting that are introduced is the universe is not in a good place. As glossy as everything feels in The Phantom Menace and in Attack of the Clones before the war, this Master and Apprentice and Queen Shadow are all, spiritual brethren from a storytelling perspective. And the whole point is to drill in how bad things actually were, how corrupt the Jedi Order actually is, or how corrupted already it is, or how much their tenets took them away from the living force and disconnected them from maybe actual humanity, maybe what the light side of the force actually needed them to do, or the balance needed them to do. I don't know. There's a lot of open questions I have about after hearing this story, and I'm sure you will too. The universe itself, especially the Outer Rim, is not in a good place. There's not enough Jedi to actually defend it and to help the Republic. And the only way that the Republic cares about places is if there is something about it that can make it money, or it has something that somebody else wants that's willing to put their political power behind helping people. It's all selfish and not selfless. There's no sense of wanting to help people. And because the Jedi are the tools of the Republic, the hammer, the people that keep the peace, they never go against what the Republic basically asks them to do. Really, really fascinating to hear, the Republic be almost so rotten already. Maybe even before Sidious has really kicked in his plan into high gear, it's already dark. It's already been sickened. It's already got the cancer. We just don't know yet. That's really interesting. There's many, many, many historical and Force concepts. And I'm sure that I'm not going to be able to cover all of them because there's so many of them that literally there would be so many screenshots of pages. And so as soon as I'm looking forward to all of the great people that are probably going to listen to this and catch everything that I've missed. Let's talk about history. There's lots of references to the Sith Empire, to Sereno being a Sith planet. So that's the planet that Dooku is originally from. It was a Sith stronghold originally. And then the original Count of Sereno basically single-handedly got rid of them. Which is really, really funny that, then it ends up becoming a Sith stronghold again. We hear some interesting words to describe this. Knights wearing armor of all black. So I got the Knights of Ren chills a little bit, which was kind of cool. And, that's just one example of historical stuff. There's also the idea that literally there's Sith artifacts spread across the galaxy. Not a small amount of time of the story is spent talking about these things. They actually go on an adventure to try and find some of them, which is kind of interesting too. So this is all in the past. This is all the Dooku story. Ventress herself has a sub-story where she is internally struggling with the balance within herself, and in some ways, it's a fight for her soul. So although her story is smaller because it's the frame story, it's still valuable of, what she experiences. So I don't want to downplay that, but the primary, say, plot and push of the book is Dooku's story of how he grew up and experienced the world. I do want to make a small comment. And Kevin, if you listen to this, I love that you've turned the Jedi Temple into Hogwarts effectively. I don't know if it's like the British nature of yourself and boarding schools, but I got that Hogwarts feel, especially with the clans, I think they're called, the groups of younglings that are basically grouped together, and they have like clans associated with them. I think the Jedi Council or the Jedi Temple even, or the Jedi Order even has 4 founders. So there was these little things that made me feel very Hogwartsy, and I thought it was a nice touch. I thought yeah, sure, the Jedi as these kids are growing into teenagers and then being Padawans and being selected by masters to be further trained, almost like journeymanship. I really appreciated, what would Jedi school be like, and I'm cool with it. It was really cool. Some more kind of historical stuff. So I mentioned that these Sith artifacts are spread across the galaxy, and there's actually a almost like a holding area for them in the Jedi Temple, and they're called Bogan, which is the idea that these are forbidden objects. And Bogan is actually a really interesting word. It's from the original script that George Lucas wrote when he was originally naming, the Sith as we know them now, and the Jedi. The Jedi were originally called the Jedi Bindu of the Ashla, and the Sith originally had a name called Bogan. So I was over the moon to hear it come back and, get a name, just like how Ahsoka goes by Ashla. We got to see Bindu in the one in the middle. I'm the one in the middle in Rebels. So really great Easter eggs spread throughout this book. It's just chef's kiss. The other kind of Sith thing that was kind of introduced, and again, I don't know if this was originally in Legends or not, but the idea of Sith war beasts. Whew. I want to hear that story. We get to hear a little bit about it, which is really cool. In the story itself, I mean, there's a dragon. The Terataka. There's a dragon. It's the world dragon of Sereno, and it awakens because of Dooku and the darkness that he has within himself. And, world dragons very much evoke the idea of like Ragnarok and end of times and, harbingers of doom and stuff like that. So the world dragon kept Sereno together and was sleeping until Dooku came around and woke it up. And then years later, it ends up bonding with him, and Dooku ends up having to kill it. And there's a lot of mythological parallel in that. I can't even go into it in this because I will just be talking for the next 6 hours, and you might as well just go and listen to the audio drama because it's only 6.5 hours. So cool. So cool. And the fact that Sith artifacts are around and that the Jedi Council is finding more and more and more of them, and specifically trying to keep them under wraps, and that they seem to be popping up everywhere and people seem to be buying them. Lots of really interesting stuff introduced in that, and that this Terataka is actually a kind of corrupted animal that you can bond, or that Dooku bonds with, which, so lots of cool stuff. There's visions in this book. Sifo-Dyas suffers from them. And Sifo-Dyas was introduced conceptually, of course, in Attack of the Clones as the original Jedi Master that ordered the clone army. And everyone is incredulous about that, and we don't find that out until until Clone Wars, when we find out that Sifo-Dyas kind of went crazy, and they explore that and how experiencing constant visions of the future would make you crazy. There's a really cool older Jedi Master named Lean who mentors both Dooku and Sifo-Dyas, and she has a passion for creatures. So she's the one who kind of introduces the concept of a Sith war beast. She has a convor, and if you know that name, the convory are Force owls. They were introduced in Clone Wars and have a special place in Dave Filoni's heart, and have come up in Rebels. And we know that the daughter, the Morai, is a convor who follows Ahsoka around. And so there's two that she owns, quote unquote, in the book. And I just found that very, very interesting to include those animals, those Force animals, and one of them ends up getting a name of a goddess of wisdom, which I thought was just a really excellent parallel to mythology. Athena, she's got an owl, things like that. At one point, Dooku goes on a mission to try and find some Sith artifacts, and they end up getting a little bit caught in a nexus of the Force, which is bent on darkness. So we know about nexuses of the Force from other locations, like we know Dagobah probably was one, Lothal, may have been one. We've heard this idea, a nexus of the Force. Yoda talks about how the chosen one, you're talking about a nexus of the Force, but in this person? Yeah, like so where there's a concentration of Force, right? And this place is very interesting because it's like the whole world is like covered in moss and the moss eats things. It's very scary. And well done. But Dooku and Sifo Dyas and Lean, as they're on this planet, end up having these Force visions, and the sound design is exceptional. Whew. It's amazing. And there's actually a line that I heard ever so momentarily in it. So I'm gonna just say it. The cauldron is open. The Sith are reborn. Okay. The cauldron is open. The Sith are reborn. We know one Sith who has a cauldron. Sheev Palpatine. He has himself a cauldron. He uses it in Clone Wars to attack Yoda. He uses it in Rebels to try to get into the world between worlds. Is this a 9 thing? I don't know. So cool. During this dark side vision, Dooku sees almost like an inevitability of his future. So he sees that simultaneously, he sees 2 parallel paths that are almost the exact same. He sees the Jedi taking over the Senate and ruling and basically becoming the thing that they've always sworn to protect against. So the Jedi go and take over the Senate and force things to happen and become, almost like these supernatural force keepers. At the same time, he sees the clone army and the Clone Wars happen. So it's like 2 parallel paths. And at some point, there is only one way. Dooku realizes he has to stop the Jedi from kind of taking over everything. But, like we've seen in Mortis, Anakin knowing too much about his future, he said, I have to stop this from happening. I have to stop the evil. And Dooku very much has this moment, except he doesn't, at least not yet. There's something that prevents him from going full, like, Sith trying to prevent the Jedi from doing all of this evil. Lean, who's done this many times before, pulls out some cloth, some gauze, it's described as. And Dooku says, gauze? And she's like, the balm of the luminous. There are words woven into the gauze. As we wrap them around our arms, we bind ourselves in the light. And he says, that sounds like witchcraft. It is a tool, a means to find balance. And then starting at the wrist, you wind the fabric up your arm like this to keep the palm open towards the stars. Okay. So that's the first half of the ritual to find balance. Whoa. I've been freaking out since I realized that the daughter in Mortis has wrist wraps. Because who else do we know that has wrist wraps? Rey. Who else do we know that has wrist wraps? Well, now we know that Dooku, actually from this point on in his, I think he's about 17, from that point all the way until he leaves the Jedi Order, wraps his arms in this fashion. His bindings, they call them. His wrist wraps, his arm wraps. He has them all the time. And he repeats the chant at subtle times. It's really interesting. And I'm going to go into the chant in a moment. But so this is a balance ritual. And people like Rey fundamentally from some point, she's never without them. The daughter in Mortis also has them. Also, Ventress has them, which I didn't even notice until I started watching or listening to the story, at least when she is, active in the Clone Wars as a Sith assassin. There's something about these wrist wraps. There's something about Rey's wrist wraps, and there's something there. And now, after that, they chant to find balance. So the three of them on this planet. So this is the cleansing mantra to rid themselves of, the evil, right? We call upon the three: light, dark, and balance true. One is no greater than the others. Together they unite, restore, center, and renew. We walk into the light, acknowledge the dark, and find balance within ourselves. The Force is strong. I recently recorded a Force episode, and I said something incredibly similar to this because I had been listening to, many interviews with George Lucas, some things that Dave Filoni had said, and really just trying to explore, okay, what is the Force? What the Force? This whole podcast is about that, and I've never done a segment specifically on the Force. And what I had found through conversations is that I describe it differently, and I describe it a little bit differently in the podcast that will come out next week. But it goes further than that in that conversation. But I found it just really fascinating to hear my words almost echoed back to me, which, not that they're my words. This is what George, Dave, everyone theoretically that talks about the Force is trying to say. And we hear a really fascinating chant and mantra. And this chant and mantra is from the ancient Jedi. And the ancient Jedi, when they use those words, it typically means before the time of the Sith and Jedi separation. So important. Wrist wraps, chanting. I think the only other important, really, really important thing is to remind everyone as they're listening to this story is that Dark Force users are supremely unhappy. If you think it's fun to be a villain, it's really not. I think that's a really good reminder in this book or in this audio drama. That's about wraps it up. I got so much enjoyment out of listening to this. I do not think that I caught everything. I'm going to have to re-listen to it. I'm sure I'll catch more. I really would like to deep dive into the themes, especially presented within this, and some of the conceptual ideas presented. But thank you, Cavan Scott, for writing this exceptional story. Thank you, Star Wars, for giving it to us. Cheers. Thank you, everyone, for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music composed by Christy Carew. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We would like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love What the Force, In Wild Space, Night Huntress, and Susan. We are available wherever podcasts are found and YouTube. You can connect with us at Twitter at WT4 Show or on Facebook at What the Force. Feel free to reach out to us and start a conversation. Cheers.